Now we shall discuss how was the Constituent Assembly introduced the Constitution into the effect. It was the date on from 1946 we are working out. The Constituent Assembly is framing the Constitution. There were many additions, many deletions, many discussions going on, and this process going on. Finally, on 4th November 1948, the chairman of the drafting committee, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, was standing in the Constituent Assembly and used a statement, Mr. President, Sir, I now introduce the Constitution of the Constituent Assembly, which was framed by the drafting committee, which was given the entire responsibility to ensure that the reports which are given by the other committees will be drafted very clearly and fairly and will be put forth your view so that it could be adopted. Now, what are the other committees that referred what is necessary for our Indian nation to the drafting committee? Drafting committee, in the name itself we can understand draft means to frame it and fix it. So what are the other committees that are reported them to do the things? Let us see here. First one is the Union Powers Committee. The powers of the Union government, or how are the powers of the other nations, these all were studied and given reference to the drafting committee by the Union Powers Committee. Next, moving on to the Union Constitution Committee. How is the union of the other nations? How are the constitutional powers vested with the union governments? These all were discussed in the Union Constitution Committee. Next, Provincial Constitution Committee. How are the states? How are the governments sharing power between the center and the states? What is a federal setup? What is a unitary setup? What is the difference between these two? What are the advantages of unitary? What are the advantages of federal? What are the disadvantages of both of them? These all were discussed through the provincial committees. Later we have the committees on advisory boards. What are the other setup or the constitutional framework required? What are the councils to be set up to govern or to guide the government or to give advices for them? How to take advices from them? Who should be given the authority to advise the government or president or the prime minister? Whether the advisory should be binding on them or not. These all were discussed by the advisory committee. Moving on to the minority affairs. As India was born of the communal riots and we have faced many problems of Hindus and Muslims fighting between each other when the clash with the final division was done, they have to go on for migrating from one place to another place. In this process, they came forward with the minority rights. Even 1% or 2% of the population are in that particular caste or category of people. Their rights should be safeguarded very clearly. How are the other governments safeguarding them? This was discussed during the minority committee's reports. And the fundamental rights, the basic heart of the constitution, that is the fundamental rights, which we have borrowed from the Bill of Rights from America, which is a key one for the entire constitution, was discussed in the fundamental rights committee. Then moving on to the tribal rights. In India we have many tribal communities staying in every state. We have a tribal community. So looking at the tribal community people, how their rights have to be entrusted other than the minority community people. So everybody will get their say. That is the reason why they have appointed the tribal committee also to discuss on this. So finally, the Union Powers Committee, the Union Constitution Committee, the Provincial Committee, then moving on to the Advisory Committee, Minorities Committee, Fundamental Rights Committee, then the Tribal Committee. All these committees made their reports in the process of from 1946 to 1948, and they drafted their views and put forth in front of the drafting committee. Then again the drafting committee analyzed all these views, and again they did the additions and the deletions whichever is necessary, whichever is apt for our Indian context. Then later they came forward on 4th of November 1948. Then finally Ambedkar stands in front of the Constituent Assembly and requests the President to adopt the Constitution for discussion and later to adopt it. In this way, after they introduced the bill in the Constituent Assembly of the presence of the President, it was given a span of 8 months of period where everybody can put forth their views, and everybody's view will be considered if it is truly genuine and if it is addressing any particular issue which is not addressed by any of these committees. Almost all the points are covered in these committees, but if still any further points are left out or any issue is left out or any particular community people are left out, they can put forth their views, and it is ample of time was given, 8 months, and finally it was adopted. After 8 months we came to a conclusion that this is one of the best constitutions in the world. It has nearly 315 schedules of articles and divided into 8 schedules, but now in actual reality we have 444 articles divided into 12 schedules or parts. But it is India's constitution is the lengthiest constitution in the world ever since in the bulk of the volume, and also the time span also was taken was too much, 2 years, 11 months, 18 days, but we feel that it was the best constitution survived till the nation, because some nations whose constitution was adopted very soon in a less span of time, but the nations failed in getting their success of the nations, and nations broke down into independent nations. But India is still surviving as a strong nation, and people of India are still happy to a larger extent. All the interests of the people are advised and admired in the Indian constitution, and if any person feels he is deprived of the rights or anything, he can move on to get his rights to be done. That is all done in the constitution framework for us. So Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's efforts and all the members of the Constituent Assembly efforts were sincerely dedicated, and all of them have put for their efforts for the future of the Indian nation. Let us hope the Constitution survives and lives long. Now let us discuss what are the points, or how did we adopt the other nations towards our nation, and how did we modify them and fix them to our context. We will discuss.